Before I left for France, almost everyone I knew said the same thing. Watch out, the French are rude. Not one person, not two. Basically everyone. My colleague at work said it. My neighbor said it. A man I barely knew at a coffee shop somehow found out I was going and said it unprompted. So I boarded the train. I took the Eurostar, which is the famous tunnel train that runs under the English Channel. The stretch of sea between England and France, with this one idea already sitting in my head before I'd even arrived. Are they actually rude? I decided, somewhere under the water, between two countries, that I would pay attention and find out for myself. The train pulled into Gare du Nord, which is the main railway station in northern Paris, and my first thought was that it looked nothing like the Paris in films. It was loud, crowded, slightly chaotic, with pigeons flying around the high ceiling and people moving in every direction with enormous urgency. A woman behind me in the ticket barrier line made a sharp sound. Not quite a word, just a sound when I took 2 extra seconds to find my ticket. I thought about what everyone had told me, but then I looked at her face and she just looked tired and late and like she had somewhere to be. I've made that exact sound myself in busy train stations back home. Maybe that wasn't rudeness. Maybe that was just Tuesday. I found the metro, the underground train system, dragged my bag down 2 flights of stairs, went the wrong way once, corrected myself, and eventually surfaced in a quieter neighborhood on the other side of the city. The street outside my small hotel was narrow and calm. A cat sat on a windowsill across the road. Someone had put flower boxes on almost every balcony above me, and they were overflowing with color. This, I thought, was closer to what I had pictured. I dropped my bag in the room, which was small, but had a window that opened onto a courtyard and let in good afternoon light, and went straight back outside because sitting in a hotel room in Paris felt like a waste. I walked with no plan, which is genuinely the best way to see any city for the first time. Paris revealed itself slowly, in small pieces, a flower market filling an entire street with color and smell, a bakery with its window arranged so carefully it looked like a still-life painting, an old man sitting outside a cafe with a small glass of wine and a newspaper, reading with such absolute unhurried calm that it looked almost like he was doing it professionally. I stopped at a cafe with a long zinc counter, that classic silver-gray metal bar you see in traditional Parisian cafes, and decided to attempt my first coffee order in French. I had practiced. "I want a coffee, please," in French, is "un café, s'il vous plaît." Simple enough. I said it. The barman looked at me for 1 second, said, "Of course," in perfect, unaccented English, and turned to make it. I stood there for a moment, feeling slightly outmaneuvered. My carefully rehearsed French had lasted approximately 4 words. The coffee, however, was excellent, strong, and small, and drunk. Standing up at the counter, which is the French way, and which I found I actually liked. No chair, no table, no fuss. Just coffee, and then continue with your day. The next morning I found a boulangerie, which is a traditional French bread and pastry shop, a few streets from the hotel. The smell coming through the door was the kind of smell that should probably be illegal because of how effective it is at making you forget any previous plans you had. I went in and tried again with my French, this time asking for a croissant. I said the word the way it sounds in my head, which was apparently not correct because the woman behind the counter, older, hair pulled back, reading glasses on the end of her nose, paused and looked at me with an expression I couldn't immediately read. Then she said the word back to me, slowly and correctly, the French way, and waited. I repeated it. She shook her head slightly and said it again. I tried again. She did a small nod, not a big approving nod, just a small one that meant, close enough. You tried and handed me the croissant. I walked out onto the street with that pastry and felt unreasonably pleased with myself. She hadn't switched to English to make it easier. She hadn't ignored me or made me feel stupid. She had just corrected me and made me do it properly, like a teacher who believes you're capable of better. I started attempting French everywhere after that. Not because my French improved dramatically, it did not, but because trying felt like the right thing to do, and people seemed to respond differently when you tried, even badly. The Louvre, the enormous, world-famous art museum housed in a former royal palace in the center of Paris, was on my list because it felt wrong not to go. I went on day 3. The building itself is staggering from the outside. A vast palace surrounding a courtyard with a modern glass pyramid in the middle that somehow doesn't look strange at all anymore. Inside, I lasted about 90 minutes before my brain quietly announced that it had reached its limit. The place is genuinely enormous, one of the largest museums in the world, and the crowds near the famous pieces are intense. I spent 20 minutes just navigating toward the Mona Lisa, following signs through gallery after gallery, and when I finally arrived, I found a surprisingly small painting behind thick protective glass, surrounded by a dense crowd of people, all holding phones above their heads trying to photograph it. The painting is beautiful, historically important, endlessly fascinating to read about, but experiencing it in person that day felt less like seeing great art and more like attending a very slow and quiet rugby match. I left earlier than planned, wandered out through a side exit, and found myself on a street I didn't recognize. About 2 blocks away, I noticed a smaller, quieter museum, the Musée de l'Orangerie, which houses a series of enormous water lily paintings by the French artist Monet, displayed in 2 oval rooms designed specifically for them. There was almost no queue. Inside, it was calm and cool, and the paintings wrap around you from every side, floor to ceiling, so that you're standing in the middle of them rather than looking at them from a distance. I stayed for a long time. Sometimes the thing you didn't plan is the better thing. On my 4th evening, I walked along the Seine, the wide river that runs through the heart of Paris after dinner, when the light was completely gone and the city had shifted into its night version of itself. The difference is significant. During the day, Paris is busy and purposeful. At night, it softens. The bridges are lit from below. The water reflects everything in long, wobbling lines of gold, and people walk more slowly, as if the city itself has changed tempo. I stopped on one of the old stone bridges and leaned on the railing and waited, because someone had told me that at the top of every hour after dark, the Eiffel Tower, the Iron Tower, built in 1889, that has become the symbol of the whole country, does something unexpected. For 5 minutes, it covers itself in thousands of tiny flashing lights that make it look like it's sparkling. I waited and watched it happen and felt the particular kind of happiness that comes from seeing something you've seen in photographs your entire life and discovering that the real version is somehow better. I took the train to Lyon on day 6, about 2 hours south of Paris, a large city that most tourists skip entirely because Paris takes up all the attention. Lyon's people are aware of this and have a very calm, very confident response to it, which is that Lyon is the true food capital of France and Paris is welcome to its opinion. I walked into the old center of Lyon, which has beautiful Renaissance buildings. Buildings from the 1400s and 1500s, lining the streets along the river, and found a bouchon for dinner. A bouchon is a traditional Lyonnais restaurant, small and informal, serving the kind of food that is rich and filling and built for people who work hard with their hands. The menu was entirely in French and explained very little. I ordered based on what the couple at the next table were having, which is a strategy I recommend highly. What arrived was a thick, deeply flavored stew with what I eventually identified as beef, served with potatoes and a sauce that tasted like it had been cooking for most of the previous day. A basket of bread came with it that I finished entirely without guilt. The owner, a compact, energetic man who moved between tables at considerable speed, stopped to ask me in partial English how I was finding Lyon. I told him I had only arrived that afternoon. He looked genuinely offended on behalf of his city that I had spent 5 days in Paris first and only given Lyon 2, and proceeded to give me an 8-minute explanation of everything I needed to eat before I left. I wrote none of it down and remembered about half, but his passion was so complete and so entertaining that the conversation alone was worth the trip south. The next morning I explored Vieux-Lyon, the old quarter, which contains something I had never heard of before arriving: traboules. These are hidden passageways, built centuries ago, that run directly through the insides of buildings, connecting one street to another through a series of courtyards and corridors and staircases. From the outside, they look like ordinary wooden doors set into ordinary walls. You push the door, step inside, and suddenly you're in a stone corridor that turns, opens into a quiet courtyard with a fountain, continues through another arch, goes up half a level, turns again, and eventually deposits you on a completely different street than the one you started on. I went into one and within 4 minutes had absolutely no idea where I was. I went through 3 more, and the situation did not improve. I came out eventually onto a street I had never seen, with no clear idea of how to return to where I had started, and stood there for a moment feeling pleasantly, completely lost. The best kind of lost, the kind where you're not worried, just surprised. I found a cafe, had a coffee, looked at a map, and started again. On the train back to Paris for my flight the next morning, I watched the French countryside scroll past the window-flat farmland. Small villages, church towers appearing briefly and then disappearing. The sky wide and pale and very French, somehow, in a way I can't fully explain. And I came back to the question I had arrived with: are the French rude? My honest answer after a week is no. But they're not immediately warm either. Not in the way that some other countries are, where strangers smile at you from the first moment and conversation comes easily. France has a different rhythm. A little more formal, a little more boundaried, a little more this is how things are done here, and if you want to connect, meet us partway. The woman at the bakery who made me repeat the word properly until I got it closer to right. The barman who switched to English without making it feel like a comment. The restaurant owner in Lyon who gave me 8 minutes of passionate food recommendations because I was in his city and he wanted me to eat well. None of that was rude. All of it was, in its own way, kind. Some places open up slowly. Some places ask you to come halfway before they come the rest of the way toward you. France is one of those places. And once you understand that, once you stop waiting for it to perform warmth on your timeline, something shifts. The city stops being a backdrop and starts being a place where real people live and work and eat extraordinarily well and argue about cheese with great sincerity. That's when it stops being a trip and starts being something you'll think about for a long time afterward. The halfway, I can tell you, is completely worth it.